Okay, we are recording. Here we go.
So Kent, I asked you if it was all right to record and throw on our the group's YouTube page. Is that all right with
Yeah,
you?
I think you would ask me that.
Okay, good.
That's good.
Thanks. You're the director at Camp, is it Camp Fowler?
Correct. Up in Lake Pleasant.
Lake Pleasant. That's near Speculator?
Yep.
Okay. I drive through there every year or two. Me and my wife head up to the high peaks. We try to get there once or twice a year. And that's on a road.
Nice.
Are you back from your trip, Zach?
Oh, hi, Melissa. No, I'm in Detroit. I'm halfway back. I gotta.
Oh, what a travel day.
Yeah, well, it's not been a problem so far. Hopefully, things in Tompkins County are okay.
Good.
Nice to see you.
You too.
I see Gwen's name there. Are you there, Gwen? Maybe she's away from the.
Yes.
Oh, hey,
There she is.
Hi.
how are you, Gwen?
Good. How are you?
Good.
It stopped snowing in Ithaca, so I'm hoping that the roads will be clear by the time you get back here.
I hope so. Yeah, we got a couple hours before we even start that leg of the trip. So there's some time to have things get cleaned up.
So you were going camping or something, right?
No, not camping. I flew up to Albuquerque and then we drove down to the Carlsbad Caverns area, went through the caverns and I hiked Guadalupe Peak. That's the highest mountain in Texas. Was cool, but a pretty good climb, pretty good hike. Where's Leslie and Priscilla? Are they?
Priscilla's, I think, en route somewhere, but Leslie is here. I think she just joined us.
I'm here.
Oh, hey, okay.
I'm in a locker room, so
You're in a locker room.
you
I'm
can
in
hear
an
me,
airport.
right?
Yeah, I can. I'm in an airport.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm in a locker room because I decided I needed to get here and listen from here instead of trying to do it walking. I might have been better off walking, but. And Priscilla has her daughter in town, so I don't know if she'll make it.
Okay. Well, I guess since I'm here and able to tune in, I'll take charge of the introduction duty. Alicia is sort of hanging back as our tech support, so I appreciate her being there to step in if I wasn't able to make it to the Zoom, but here I am, and it's a couple minutes after 10, so maybe we can get started since our guest is here waiting patiently. And so I wanted to welcome Kent Busman to the senior breakfast for this month. And as has been our routine for we're going on a year and a half or so.
Oh, no.
He's going to tell us a story. Now, I think Leslie, I think I could hear.
Yeah, I'm going to turn off my.
Yeah, everybody other than Kent should probably mute. All right, so Kent, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. It's I don't see anybody eating breakfast, so I'm a little disappointed in that because I was looking forward to seeing what people had. But I turned on the news this morning. It's pretty grim. There's lots of bad things going on, lots of hate going on out there. So I'm going to tell you some love stories because I think that's maybe what we need to hear. And this first one is an old Jewish tale called Clever Rachel. And it's just it's a love story. So there once was a young maid whose name was Rachel. And she lived with her father in a little inn at the far end of the forest. Now, Rachel was just one of these wonderful people. For some of you love to be around and things, but what she was really known for was her cleverness. People would come into the inn and say, Rachel, I have a riddle for you. And they'd tell her the riddle, she'd think about it, and she would always be able to answer that riddle. Or if two people came into the inn and they were arguing with each other, she would say, tell me your side of the story and tell me your side of the story. And I'll find the silver thread that still weaves your friendship together. And sure enough, by the end of the day, they'd be walking hand in hand or arm in arm out of the inn. Now, on the other end of the forest was where the king lived with his palace and all of his people. And the king also thought he was clever and he thought he was wise, but he wasn't all that wise because there's a difference between being clever and wise. And I know he wasn't wise because he said this. He said, I won't marry a woman unless she's as clever as I am, which is kind of a dumb thing to say. But he heard about this woman, Rachel, at the far end of the forest. So he sent his knight there to see if she was as clever as what they were saying. So the knight got on his big steed, rode through the forest, over the bridge, through the woods, got to the inn, and did what knights do. And instead of knocking on the door, he just kicked the door in, drew his sword out, pointed it at the innkeeper and said, Innkeeper, the king has these 3 questions for you. What is the fastest thing? What is the closest thing? And what is the dearest thing? And the king said, or the innkeeper said, I don't know, but can I ask my daughter? And the knight said, yeah. So he went back and said, Rachel, there's a knight from the king here. He's got 3 riddles and I don't know the answer. And if I don't answer them right, he's probably going to burn our inn down and we'll have to live as vagrants the rest of our lives. And she said, Papa, calm down. Trust in God and trust in me. Tell me the riddles. And in the morning, I will tell you the answer. So he told her the 3 riddles. And she said, Papa, trust me, sleep well. And in the morning, I'll tell you the answer. And that night, he slept very well because he trusted God, but he really trusted Rachel. And the next morning, she whispered in his ear, and he came out, and the knight was still standing there with his sword because he was a very noble knight. And he said, do you have the answer, old man? And he said, I think I do. And he said, what is the fastest thing? And the innkeeper said, well, the fastest thing is thought. What is the closest thing? Oh, Sir Knight, what could be closer than the very earth upon which we stand? And what is the dearest thing? And the innkeeper said, there is nothing more dear than love. And so the knight took these answers, got on his steed, rode back to the king, and the king was pleased with these answers. And he thought, I have to meet this Rachel. So he sent his knight out again with another riddle for her to come to meet him. And the knight came in and he was going to kick down the door, but the door at the inn was still down. So he just walked in and there was the innkeeper and he drew his sword out and said, old man, the king wishes to see your daughter, but she must come to him this way. She must come neither walking nor riding. She must come neither clothed nor unclothed. And she must come with a gift that is not a gift. And the old man said, oy vey. And so he went back to Rachel and said, Rachel, the king has asked for these impossible things to come. He's going to burn down our inn. We have to live as vagrants the rest of our lives. She said, Papa, tell me what the king requests. And in the morning, I'll give you the answer. Sleep well, trust in God and trust in me. And that night, the old man slept well because he trusted God, but he really trusted Rachel. And in the morning, Rachel said, Papa, I need a goat. Okay. And I need that fish net you have up on the wall. My fishing net? Yes, Papa. And I need 2 doves. And so Rachel took the fishing net, she took off her clothes and wrapped herself in the fishing net. And she sat on the goat with her feet dragging on the ground, and she held the doves in her hands. And this is the way she went through the forest, over the bridge, and came to the palace of the king. And the king looking out on his palace steps over his big stone causeway below, saw this woman coming, and he thought, this must be Rachel. And he went down and he greeted her, and she said, "Hail, my lord. I have come as you have requested. I am on this goat with my feet on the ground, so I'm neither riding nor am I walking." And the king looked at her once and he thought, she's beautiful. And she said, "And my lord, I come wrapped in this fishnet, so I'm neither clothed nor unclothed." And he looked at her twice and he thought, she is clever. "But," he said to the king, "where is my gift that is not a gift?" "Oh, my lord, it's right here." And she held out her hands. And as the king went to grab it, she opened her hands and those two doves flew away. And the king fell in love with Rachel, because that's how things work in stories like this. And they agreed to get married, but not until the king had one requirement. And this, again, is why I know the king was not wise, though he was clever. He said, "Rachel, you must promise to never go against one of my rulings in a court of law, or else I'll have to send you back." And she said, "Oh, my love, I will do my best to honor this request." And the two were married, and oh, they loved each other, and they had a good marriage, and they lived together. But Rachel would still like to get up in the morning and take off her queenly robes and put on her old garments from working in the inn. And she'd walk the streets and she would see people and they would say, "There's the queen." And she'd say, "Give me a riddle." They'd give her a riddle and she'd solve that riddle. Or if there were two people who were arguing, she would say, "Tell me your story and tell me your story." And she would find that silver thread that would wind their friendship back together. But one day as she was walking in her old clothes, she saw a man sitting on a curb, and he was hunched over and his eyes were swollen and tears were coming down. Oh, and she sat down next to him. She said, "Oh, my friend, tell me your story, and I will find something to make you glad within it." And he said, "Oh, there's no happiness in my story at all. Tell me, my friend." She said, "Oh, okay." He said, "I'm a poor man. I live with my wife and my small son. We have a little farm. We don't have much, but my horse was going to give birth to a foal, and we're going to be able to sell that foal to pay the mortgage for another year on our farm so that we could stay there and survive. But my horse gave birth to the foal beneath my neighbor's wagon." And my neighbor said, "That foal belongs to me. It was born under my wagon." I said, No, it's my horse. It's my foal." No. And we went to the king, and I told the king my story, and my neighbor told the king his story. And the king ruled in favor of my neighbor and took my foal. And so now I have no money, and we're going to lose our farm, and we're going to live as vagrants forever. There is no happiness in my story. And Rachel said, "Aye, that is a sad, sad tale. But do this." And she whispered something in his ears. And you know what? The man sat up straight and he stopped crying and he walked away with his shoulders back, and he was whistling as he walked away. Now, the very next day, the king got up, as the king always does, and he walked out onto his veranda and looked down on the stone sidewalk going out from his palace, and he saw a strange sight. He saw a poor farmer with a fishing pole and a can of worms, and the farmer walked up onto his stone sidewalk and he put a worm on the hook and he cast his line out and he began fishing on the king's walkway. And the king called down, man, are you daft? Do you expect to catch fish from a sidewalk?" And the man hollered back up, "Oh, my king, truly, if a wagon can give birth to a horse, this sidewalk can give me fish to feed my family." And the king knew that Rachel had gone against one of his rulings. Oh, and he went down and said, "Rachel, did you talk to this man? Did you go against one of my rulings?" And she said, "Oh, my love, I did. I confess, I did." "Oh, Rachel. Now I'll have to send you back to the inn. Oh, this is truly sad." And Rachel said, "Oh, my love, yes, this grieves me greatly. But before I go, let's have a great feast to celebrate the love that we shared." And the king was moved by this. And they had a great feast planned and lots of food and lots of wine. They sat down and the king said, "Rachel, but I got to send you away because that's my ruling. I have to do that. But But I want you to look around this palace and take with you your most dear possession with you to remember our time together. And Rachel said, "Oh, my king, 'tis such a great gift." So they started the feast, and Rachel made sure that the king's wine goblet always stayed full that night. And the king ate and he drank and he drank and maybe drank a little more. And he began to get very, very tired and tipsy. And so the king himself fell asleep at the table. And as soon as the king was asleep, Rachel had her servants come and they wrapped the king up in warm blankets and furs. And they laid the king gently down in the back of a wagon and hitched up horses. And Rachel said, "Get up," and quietly rode those horses in that wagon through the forest, away from the palace, over the bridge to a little inn at the far end of the forest. And the king woke up the next morning to the sound of birds singing and the sound of water babbling around him, and very bad headache. And he said, "Where am I?" And he heard a voice that he recognized that said, "Why, you're outside my father's inn at the far end of the forest." And the king looked and he said, "Well, how did I get here?" And then Rachel's face came into view, the king lying down. She said, "Oh, my love, you said that I could take with me from the palace my most dear possession. And what I hold most dear, my lord, is you." And he looked at Rachel once and he saw that she was beautiful. And he looked at her twice and he saw that she was clever. And he looked at her a third time and he remembered how foolish he was. And so he asked Rachel for forgiveness for his foolishness. And she, of course, forgave him. And the two of them rode in the wagon back from the inn, back to the palace. And it is said that they ruled there very cleverly and very wisely until the color of their hair and their head turned as white as the new fallen snow. Clever Rachel. That's a Eastern European folk tale. This next one comes a little bit closer to home, but I had on this earth two grandparents, Jakob and Minnie, and they've gone on, but their stories remain with me. And Jakob and Minnie were Dutch, and they came over from the Netherlands by the boat, and they came up the Hudson, of course, the way the Dutch did. And the Dutch who had been here for a couple of hundred years saw these new Dutch immigrants coming. They sent them right on the Erie Canal, right on past us over to the Midwest. And Jakob and Minnie, they settled in Iowa first before they moved to their home in Michigan, where I met them. So, and they were in love. They were young immigrants in love, and they were out there on the prairie, and they had a little farm, like a cow and pig, and they took care of the hay and stuff. And they built one of those sod huts in the side of a hill, the huts that would keep you warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And they had a grass roof on top, so the way they built them back in the day. And they were happy. They were happy until my Uncle Harold came along, the first baby, and just messed them up because there was a baby now. And up until this point, Jakob and Minnie had gone to the field. They were perfect helpmates, equally suited for each other, working in the fields together, working all day. And that worked. But now Minnie, she had to stay home with the baby. And so she stayed home and made sure the porridge was ready for noonday supper. And she, took care of the baby. And Jakob had to go work in the field all by himself. And she would ring the bell at noon, and Jakob would come in, and he'd be all sore and tired and sweaty. And there would be Minnie sitting there in a rocking chair with a little baby cooing there. And Jakob would say stuff like, "Yeah, okay. It was hot out there today, but it doesn't look so hot in here. It looks like you're just on vacation, hanging out there in that rocking chair all day." And Minnie, who was a very wise woman, said, "Oh, Jakob, Jakob, you're probably right. You've been working very hard out there, and I've just been taking care of the baby here. Oh, maybe we should switch jobs for a day." Jakob said, "Oh, Minnie, that'd be silly. I'd have a whole vacation day. Never had one of those. Just sitting around here with a baby doing nothing, and you out there in the fields. Oh yeah, Jakob. Well, let's try that. Let's you and I switch jobs for a day." And Jacob finally agreed to it. And she said, "No, Jacob, you have to do just a couple things, okay? Okay. You got to make sure the baby's still alive when I get home." "Okay, Minnie, I know that." And you should milk the cow because she has to be milked every day and put her out to pasture." "Okay, yeah. And and get the porridge cooking and ring the bell when the sun gets to high noon so that I can come home and have midday dinner." "Okay, Minnie, okay. I don't think you're gonna like this though." So she grabbed, it was because of hay cutting season. So she grabbed that big scythe, the big sickle that she took and put it over her shoulder, and she hiked down out to the fields. And Jacob was there in the house all by himself with a baby. And the baby was asleep. Jacob said, "This is something." And he sat down in that rocking chair and put his feet up. Now Jacob is used to when he's sitting down that he's used to being really tired and falling asleep. And so he wasn't really tired, but he fell right to sleep right there in the morning, asleep until he heard the baby crying. And he woke up in a start, like trying to figure out where he was. And then he realized he had to take care of the baby and he had to give the baby some milk, and he hadn't milked the cow yet. So he grabbed that crying baby, just screaming in one ear, and he ran out to the barn. And that baby was just really annoying. And he went down to milk the cow. And it's hard enough to milk a cow with two hands, but he had to milk it just with one hand, squeezing those udders. And he finally got enough milk out of that cow and got it in a bucket. Baby still screaming in his ears. And he ran back to the house and he wasn't thinking much. And he put some milk in a bottle and put that in the baby's mouth so the baby stopped screaming. "Okay, all right, finally. Okay, I got the baby quiet." And then he put the baby down on the floor and he poured the milk into the butter churn because he had to churn it into butter for the porridge that was for midday dinner. And he started churning the butter and started to turn that milk into butter. And he started to work up a sweat. And he remembered that down in the cellar, there was some good apple cider ale that had aged just perfectly down there. And he thought, I'll just go down there and take a nip because it's kind of hot and sweaty, this work I'm doing. The baby is kind of right here on the floor. He's going to be okay. And Jacob went down to the cellar. Now, as soon as Jacob went down to the cellar, the pig came into the house because Jacob hadn't closed the gate with the baby screaming in his ear with one arm and a bucket in the other. He forgot to close the gate on the barn. And the pig started going in, sniffing around, sniffing the baby, sniffing the butter churn. And Jacob's down there in the basement, and he's got the wooden, he's got the bung in the cask, and he's got the tap in his hand. And he has to knock that bung out and put that tap in real fast so the cider doesn't spill out. And just as he knocks that bung out, he hears the butter churn crash over, spill over, and hears the baby start to screaming again. And he hears the pig grunting around in the house. And he is so mad. He looks up the stairs, and there's the pig looking down on him. And he runs up the stairs. He's got that tap in his hand, and he draws back. And for the first time in his life, Jacob throws the ball straight. And he threw that wooden tap right at that pig and hit that pig right between the eyes. And that pig went oink, flop. And he killed the pig. And he goes, ah. And he sees the baby on the floor, and she's all covered in butter and curdled milk. And he's got a dead pig on the floor. And he goes to grab the pig. And then he realizes that in his other hand, he's got the bung from the cask of ale. And he looks downstairs, and there is the last of the ale dripping out of the big cask. And there's about 2.5 inches of hard cider all over the floor of the cellar down there. And he's got a dead pig and a baby covered in curdled milk. And he goes, then he remembers that he's got a cow that he's got to get out to pasture. And so he thinks, I got to take care of the pig first. So he opens the back door and he drags the pig out halfway out the back door and can't get it out any farther. So he just leaves it there. And he goes out to the barn, and there's the cow waiting in her stanchion to get out to the field. Now, Jacob doesn't have enough time to get the cow out to the field, but Jacob's smart. You can tell from this whole story where I get my smarts, that Jacob is smart, and he's going, I don't have time to get her out there, but I know where there's some grass. There's some grass on the top of the house. So Jacob takes a big plank, and he walks the cow up on the hill next to the sod house. And he takes the plank and he lays the plank down, and he takes the cow and he tries to lead the cow across the plank. Now the cow's not real happy about this, because the cow's looking down going, I don't think this is a good idea, and I'm a cow. But no matter, Jakob somehow gets the cow across over onto the roof, and the cow's pretty happy because there's green grass up there, and starts munching along, doing the stuff that cows do. And Jakob thinks, well, now I got to go down, I got to build a fire and start cooking the porridge for midday dinner. But I can't leave the cow alone up here because the cow could fall off. Jakob thinks again. He says, I know what to do. So he takes the rope lead from the cow and he lowers the rope lead down the chimney. And he runs into the house and he ties the rope around his waist, thinking, okay, if the cow gets too close to the edge, I'll just pull the cow back up and we're going to be fine. Baby's there on the floor, still covered with, milk and curds and stuff, but that's okay. I'll take care of the baby later. He gets the fire going, puts a big kettle on over the fire to start cooking it. And meanwhile, Minnie is out in the field, and she's been cutting that hay with a side, and she realizes that the sun not only got to high noon, but it's already starting to tip one or two hands beyond high noon. And she's going, Jakob hasn't rung the bell yet. I wonder if everything's all right. So she starts the long walk home. And she starts to walk home. The cow starts to walk to where the grass is greener, which is on the other side of the roof, which wasn't there because the cow went and stepped off the roof. And the cow went moo as it went down. And that rope tightened around Jakob's waist, and Jakob shot up that chimney. And he shot up until he got stuck up in the chimney, wedged up in the chimney. And the cow is hanging by the rope, sort of dangling there. It's suspended between the ground and God. And Minnie comes over the hill just in time to see the cow just sort of hanging there. And she goes, ah! And she runs down, she takes that side and she cuts that rope. And that cow goes moo, poof, down on the ground. And inside she hears a sploosh. And Jakob had shot down the chimney once the rope was cut loose. And Minnie walks around the corner and she looks at the house. And she sees a baby covered in curdled milk on the floor. She sees half a dead pig out the back door lying there. She smells stale cider coming from down below the floorboards. And she sees her husband sitting in a pot of water about to boil above a fire in the chimney. And she goes, well then, Jakob, how was your morning? And Jakob and Minnie never, ever traded jobs again. That's again based on an old European folktale, but I do think of my grandma Minnie, my grandpa Jakob, when I tell that story, as they lived out there on the prairie and tried to make their ends meet. I've got one more story. I think we've got time. If you're still eating your breakfast, I can tell you're all munching on your porridge and thinking about your midday meal and maybe second breakfast. But this is a story I found in a book. I direct a children's camp and retreat center up in the South Central Adirondacks outside of Lake Pleasant, called Camp Fowler. And most people don't believe this, but I'm an ordained minister. I find it hard to believe most days myself. But this next story I got, and it's from a book called Does God Have a Big Toe? And it's stories about stories in the Bible. And it's a love story of a different sort. And it goes like this. Old man Jake got home to his 11 boys. And he opened up a leather satchel that he carried over his shoulder. And he pulled out of that satchel a coat that had stripes of brown and yellow and green and white and black and silver and red and purple. And he walked past all of his older boys, Simeon and Reuben and Judah, all the older boys. And he got to his youngest boy, Joe, and he put that coat over his shoulders. And he said, I love you, Joe. And Joe looked at him and said, I love you too, Pops, and hugged him. And and Joe got a new coat. And the older brothers, who were good boys, didn't say anything because they were good boys. Now, the next morning, this youngest brother there got up. He woke up and said, guys, I had this dream last night. I had this dream that we were all stalks of wheat, all getting ready for the harvest. We were all stalked up there, and my sheaf was standing in the middle, and your sheaves were all around mine, and all your sheaves fell over like you were bowing to me, like I was some sort of king or something. And we were brown, like this first stripe in my jacket. We were brown. Isn't that cool? And the older boys just listened to their little brother, and they didn't say anything because they were good boys. And the next morning, Joe got up and he said, guys, guess what? I had another dream last night. It was amazing. We were all stars, and my star was in the middle, and we were all stars except you, Pa. Pa, you were the sun. You were yellow, like this stripe in my jacket. And my star was in the middle, and all of you were around me, and you all bowed down like I was a king or something. Wasn't that cool? And that was it. The older boys said to their old pops, Jake, said, Jake, Pops, you take care of this little one. We're taking the sheep over to the next county, and he's not coming with us. You got it? Okay. The old man said, okay, I'll keep the young runt here. And so Jake and Joe stayed home, and all the other boys took the sheep across to the next county and grazed them over there in the fields. And a couple days passed. And old man Jake, finally, he said to Joe, Joe, I made a whole sack of bologna sandwiches. I need you to take these sandwiches over to your brothers over in the next county and find out how they're doing. So Joe put on his nice colored jacket, grabbed that bag of sandwiches, started walking down the field. So he walked over, and he got a little ways away from his brothers, but he could see on the far distance, he could see white sheep grazing on green grass. And he looked down, looked up, looked down, said, huh, green and white, just like these two stripes in my cool jacket. Isn't that neat? And he got to his brothers, and he gave them the sandwiches. And then something happened. Because sometimes even in the best of families, even with the best of brothers, things can happen. And somebody said something. And somebody said something back. And somebody pushed somebody, and somebody swung a fist. And before you knew it, the dust was flying. And those older brothers had taken that younger brothers there. They grabbed that coat, and they ripped that coat off him, and they pushed him down into a dry well where he landed smack on the bottom of that dry well. When Joe opened his eyes, all he could see was darkness. And the first thing he thought about was that black stripe that cut across his jacket. But you know, when you are alone in a dark place, it's hard to tell how time passes, but time still passed, and he heard voices finally. And voices that sounded familiar like his brothers, and voices that didn't sound familiar at all. And he saw a rope come down, and he put that rope around under his armpits, around his shoulders, and they dragged him up out of that well into the bright sunlight. And he saw his brothers over here, and he saw a bunch of strange men with strange animals. And those strange men were putting silver coins into his brother's palms. And Joe thought, I think there was a silver stripe in that old jacket of mine. But that was the last he thought of his jacket, because then those strange men tied him up and dragged him along behind those animals. And Joe was gone to a faraway place and just was gone. Now, the older boys, they knew they were going to be in a world of hurt to come back to their pa without their little brother. So instead of just doing one bad thing, they did another bad thing. They took one of them sheep of theirs and they slit its throat. And they dripped that red blood all over that jacket with those colors. And some of that red blood dripped on that red stripe cutting through that jacket. And then they took the jacket, got their sheep, and they went back home to where their old man was. And they went into the tent where Jacob was. And it was Simeon. He's the oldest. So he walked in and he said, Pops, yeah, we found this jacket out there in the field somewhere. It looks like that jacket you gave Joe, and looks like a lion or a bear got him. You know, we're sorry. And they gave that old man that jacket, and he took that jacket and he held it in his arms, and he cried and he cried, till he couldn't cry anymore. And then he took that bloody jacket and he folded it up and he put it in a leather satchel and put it under his cot. And he did the one thing you do when bad things happen. That he kept breathing. And he got up the next morning and he kept living, and he would, there was a huge Joseph-sized hole in his life, and often he would fall into that hole and just be in terrible sorrow. But he learned day after day that the hole wasn't going to go away, but that you could learn to walk around it more and not always fall in it. And time passed, which is the blessing of time. And it passed, and as things went along, and one day it stopped raining and the grass stopped growing and there wasn't any food for the sheep. And then there wasn't any food for the people. And old man Jacob said to his boys, he said, boys, you got to get on your donkeys and ride on down to Egypt, because somebody down there was smart enough to save the extra grain they'd gotten these last few years and saved away. And I don't care what you have to do. You bow as low as you have to, but you got to come back with some food or we're going to die. And so those brothers got on their donkeys and they rode down to Egypt, and they had to sit in this palace with this stone seating area. And there weren't even no magazines like there are in the doctor's office. They just had to sit there in quiet. And then the big doors finally opened up at the end, and a man walked out wearing a purple robe, like that last colored stripe in that old forgotten jacket. And that man walked out, and those boys looked at that man. But you know what? When you're poor and hungry, you don't look at a king. They just bowed down as low as they could before him. And that man in that purple robe walked out, and he thought of something he hadn't thought of in years. Thought of a couple dreams he'd had long, long ago. And then he thought of what his brothers did to him. And he wanted to hurt him. He wanted to hurt him bad. But he finally just bent over and he said, hey, guys, it's me, Joe. And they looked at him and they were amazed and terrified. And they said, guys, where's Pa? How's he doing? Is he okay? Go back and get Pa. Come down here. We can all live here. And so the brothers were amazed, and they got on their donkeys and they rode back and they talked to their old Pa. And they took old man Jacob and they put him in a wagon because he's too old to ride a donkey. And they brought him down to Egypt in that old wagon. And they got back to this palace waiting area with a stone waiting area. And there's no magazines to read. They just sit there. And finally the doors opened, and out came this king in a purple robe. And old man Jacob, his eyes weren't any good anymore, and his hands trembled a lot, but he stood up and he reached into a leather satchel that he had, and he opened it up and he unfolded an old coat and see if you can remember what the stripes were. The first stripe was brown, and then there was yellow, and then green and white and black and silver and red and purple. And he unfolded that jacket and he put it on his son's shoulders. And he said, I love you, Joe. And Joe bear hugged his Pa. He said, I love you too, Pa. And then all the brothers came in and they all hugged each other and were hugging and crying. And the Egyptians, who couldn't understand a word of what was being said, they all hugged each other and were crying. And Joe and his brothers and his Pa decided that they were blessed twice. The first was that they had been able to survive this famine, and they'd been able to be brought back together. And that was the first blessing. But the second blessing was that they got to be a family again, and that maybe, just maybe this time, they could do it a little bit better. That's the story of Joe and his jacket. So thanks for letting me into your homes and your gyms and your offices and your airports. Thanks for letting me be here.
thanks for showing up, Kent. Really enjoyed the stories, and I love the reminder that some of those Bible stories fit in with all the other types of stories that we get too. They're just narratives like anything else. So
Yeah.
enjoyed the stories and your telling of them, and I appreciate everybody for showing up today. And I hope that I can land in Tompkins County Airport a little later this afternoon and be in town myself. But everybody else, take care.
Thanks, everyone. Nice
Thanks,
meeting
that
you,
was
even if
great.
it's over Zoom.
That was great.
Great. All right, take care. Enjoy this
Bye.
beautiful day.
Bye-bye.